So, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness comes from director Sam Raimi. So, like, it's keeping with the tradition of having, a horror director attached to this story of a sorcerer. The last film was, of course, directed by Scott Derrickson. He was known for, like, a few horror films, like Sinister and all that. So we got another horror director, Sam Raimi, who's actually no stranger to comic book films, with obviously the Spider-Man films that he's done. But I was surprised actually how much horror that Raimi actually gets to do in this MCU Doctor Strange movie. Now I should say, like, it's wild. I love the fact there's a lot of stuff that I would not expect to see in an MCU film, and at the same time, there's there's a little bit of sadness too, because like it feels like I just hit the ceiling of how much horror we can expect from the MCU in terms of like keeping the MCU PG-13. Maybe one day they'll, with enough time, maybe they'll make the jump to R-rated films. At least within like the bigger scope of the MCU. Of course, like outside of that, they'll do stuff like Deadpool and stuff. But maybe someday we'll get that R-rated Doctor Strange movie, but not now, unfortunately, which is kind of sad because this film actually does go into some pretty terrifying and horrific places. And I think the problem with that is like visually and in terms of atmosphere, this film works as like a horror film. It has that perfect amount of like dread and giddiness that Sam Raimi usually put into stuff like like Evil Dead and Army of Darkness. There are a lot of shades of those types of films in there, especially when you have like stuff like dark magic and zombies and all this bizarre stuff of like distorting reality. All works perfectly for Raimi's style. It's kind of unfortunate that like a lot of like the characters get sidelined just because like there's so much to do in this film in terms of like how like the multiverse is connected and how it's breaking and how it shatters and how Doctor Strange has to put everything back together again. That I didn't realize this until I got to the end of the film, but this film is almost like exactly 2 hours, and you can really feel that because there's not a whole lot of time spent where we get to know a lot of these characters, that we can appreciate them a little bit more. Like Benedict Cumberbatch returns as Doctor Strange here, and I think he has more an interesting arc that he could have in this film. Like obviously his arc in this film is more about like getting over the past, like of course trying to repair himself after like the big blip where he was gone for 5 years, so trying to rebuild his life from that and having a sense of letting go. All that's a great arc for him to pursue, but unfortunately there's not much time for it because every moment that we think we're going to get a little bit more character from him, there's always something else happening. Like even from like very early on in the film, like we think that there's going to be some like moment of like regret and catharsis that he like, we can see it in him, like it's it's bubbling, but before anything can come of it, like there's another monster to attack, or there's another like break in reality he's got to repair. It's just like Doctor Strange is just like he's too busy, he has too much on his plate. Like, and I guess like I think that works for Sam Raimi, who's used to like doing Spider-Man, where he can barely balance his own life. But still, even within like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, there always felt like there was some time to get to slow down and get to like be with the character and to understand him a little bit more. And the problem with this film is there's barely any time to spend with Strange outside of all like the wild and crazy magic that's going on in this film, which, don't get me wrong, is cool. Like style wise, there's a lot of stuff that I did not expect to see in a Marvel film of this nature, and I'm glad that it's in there. It's just like I can't help but feel like there's like an extra 20 minutes of like character development that really could have pushed this film further, that really could have given it more. Because there's not a lot of time to slow down. Like now you think there might be like a bigger connection with the addition of America Chavez, who is this teenage girl. She's played by I'm gonna screw up her name here. Just say as best I can here. Shotel Gomez. And it feels like okay, so it's another teenager that Doctor Strange has to deal with. So again, we have like the daddy wizard who has to help out the teenager with his mess. And I thought, okay, this could be cute. I really dug how, Doctor Strange interacted with Peter Parker in the last Spider-Man film. This could be a good dynamic. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of time. Like, it starts off with some decent back and forth, but there's not a whole lot of time to get to know these characters. That in one of the most clumsy moments, there's a scene, and I won't divulge because I'm trying to keep it spoiler free, but there is a scene where both of their pasts, like that they're haunted by, are kind of revealed in the most like blunt and frankly clumsy way that they kind of, it's like, okay, we've got to get this on the table. Let's just get this out there as quickly as possible, even if it's in a weird way. It's in a weird, like, oh, okay, I get it, you gotta get out this exposition, but I don't know, I feel like there might have been a better way for this. And the same goes like all around for all the characters. There's a lot of characters here, obviously a few like special appearances that we're not going to spoil here. But in terms of like the characters that we do know, Shywell, I keep screwing up his name. Shywell Ejiofor, who plays Carl Mordo, who you might remember from the last Doctor Strange movie way back in 2016, was set up to be the villain, and he kind of fits into that villain arc here, but more in like a supporting role. Like he's not as present, and we kind of suspect like, where he's going to be going in his life and how he despises Doctor Strange, and it kind of leads up to a whole lot of nothing. Benedict Wong, of course, returns as the Sorcerer Supreme of Wong, who is always fun. Anytime he shows up, between like the last few films of like Spider-Man and Shang-Chi, he was a lot of fun to see him pop up on the screen. I just wish he had more of an arc, because he just shows up as just like the quirky, fun sorcerer, but he's always got something to do. It just, I don't know. I kind of feel like we need like a whole series just with Wong, just to appreciate him more. You get Rachel McAdams, who comes back as Christine Palmer, the love interest of Doctor Strange, which, to her credit, she has way more to do in this film than she did the previous one. And she actually plays like a much more pivotal role than I expected, and she joins in quite a bit with Doctor Strange. But similar to the way that the film treats treats Chavez, it feels like she's more or less like a prop for Doctor Strange to get to the next part of developing more as a character. So, like, and I don't want to like demean like McAdams' role. Like, her role in this film it's way better than the last film. I'll say that. She's a lot more fun to watch in this film. She has way more to do. She plays a much more pivotal role. And yet I can't help but feel like there's way more you could do with her as well. Just because, God, I really don't want to spoil as much, but she is kind of like a big key in all this. I will say the one character I think has the most interesting like staging of their development, not so much like they had like the best arc, because their arc was pretty predictable, but Elizabeth Olsen returns as Wanda Maximoff, or Scarlet Witch, however you want to look at her, and I was surprised they in the film they actually lean more into this horror angle that I always really wanted with WandaVision. And it was like, WandaVision was so close to getting it. It was so close to being that horror monster movie. But because ultimately the show decided that it wanted to be more about the stages of grief and the acceptance of it, rather than, building it up to the monster story. Which honestly, I think that would have been a much better route to go, especially when you consider what happens in this film, to kind of favor more of the monster side, because the film kind of explores her in this way, and it's fascinating to watch how she plays a huge role in this film. At the same time, however, a lot of like the smaller emotional moments that she has with a lot of her drive is kind of on a very predictable track. And once you get to those little moments that are trying to, build up some empathy and some sympathy for her, they're kind of hollow. And I think it's just because the performances that she's playing off here don't really add a lot to it. And it just feels like, oh, okay, this is the standard moment that we've got to get to, where we've got to feel a little bit more for Wanda, and we understand more about her. It was kind of telegraphed early, and we could see this coming a mile away, but whatever, I guess we got to get to it. But I mean, like for as much problems as they had with like the underdeveloped characters, the style of this film ultimately trumps it. Like, because I know like a big argument that a lot of people are going to have about this film is that it is style over substance, and you know what? Part of that is kind of true. That there is a lot more to the style here. You can tell they put a lot more effort into having, you know, Doctor Strange and Wong fight like that giant Cyclops tentacle creature that we all saw in the previews. In as opposed to like his interpersonal conflict, which you think would have like a bigger role as kind of like almost like the catalyst for Doctor Strange's story. And unfortunately, because we get lost a bit in the multiverse, which, don't get me wrong, is fun. I like the different universes that we go to and how it definitely feels a lot more comic booky with how, you know, like the Doctor Strange movie is very much not fearful about different directions it could go. It very much felt like, you know, when you're ever like you're reading like an event comic book and then there would be like a surprise the next issue, or there'd be a cliffhanger or a stinger where like, you know, some other character would come in, or this bizarre development would happen, or this wild new costume or whatever would happen. There are a whole lot of moments like that which are fun on their on the surface. On the surface, it's a lot of fun to see what this film tries out. Especially if you're a Raymie fan. There's a lot of Raimi's great hallmarks in here. You get the Dutch angles where like the camera will tilt. You'll get like the creepy zooms that you know, like I forget like the technique it is, but like you basically like push the camera in as you zoom out, and it creates that kind of like eerie effect that we've seen in like Evil Dead and stuff. And speaking of Evil Dead, you've got a whole bunch of sequences where like the camera like shakes around and like follows characters. You have a few not to give too much away, but there's some dabbling with the dead that gets into a little bit of like some cackling territory here, which is kind of great. There's definitely some very tongue-in-cheek moments here. Although, again, like I don't know, maybe this is like my desires of like wanting to see more of like Evil Dead in a Doctor Strange movie, but it always made me feel like, okay, just a little bit further, go a little bit like. Pardon the pun, but stranger. Go a little bit further with all of this. You know, make the magic weirder, make the multiverse more bizarre, make the magic make even less sense. In some cases, it doesn't make sense. It's like, okay, this is neat. Let's go further with this stuff. And it almost gets there. It almost fully becomes a horror movie, although. Like on a whole, like it almost becomes a horror movie, but in little bits and segments. And you're probably going to see this when people start getting clips of the footage that release around the time when it goes on Disney Plus or on Blu-ray. You're going to see little clips where people are going to say, "Oh man, look at this tiny sequence here. This is like a perfect horror film." Or this sequence here, this is a great little horror film right here. And those little moments like that, I think, are wonderful for like this type of film. And frankly, I think the film actually, like, a lot of people complain that a lot of these films like go on too long. I think this one's a little bit too short. Because it's like I said, it's exactly 2 hours, and you feel like you've spent more time with just like the bizarre and surreal nature of the multiverse than you actually have with Doctor Strange and like the few familiar and new characters that are thrown into the mix here. Especially because like, and then of course, you know, they do the whole like post-credit stinger here, and I think because we haven't had a lot of time to get used to so much of like the wildness of the multiverse or like the plight of Doctor Strange as much, that it doesn't hit as much. Like it wasn't like as much as like a shrug as like the Morbius post-credit scene was, where he's just kind of like, oh, okay, whatever, we'll do an ensemble or whatever. There's definitely some weirder development that Doctor Strange is going to have in whatever film he's in next. But on the whole, just in terms of like the MCU trying to make a horror film, I think it mostly works here. There's a lot of fun moments here that I'm gonna have a lot of fun going back to watch again. I just wish that there were just a little bit more to Doctor Strange's character, because it still feels like he's a passenger in his own story. Like he's just kind of going with the flow. It's like, okay, this happened. I guess I guess this is the route I'm going now. Or, oh, okay, I'm in this universe, I'll adjust to it. Without giving too much away, though, yes, there are some surprise cameos in here, and then I will admit, though, I'm a little bit annoyed by the fact that the big cameos all have to combine into one scene here. And I think maybe it's just because, like, with the past few Marvel films, they've all kind of had, like, this, like, similar structure where we almost kind of expect these, you know, surprises and cameos that by the time they happen, it's just like, it's kind of par for the course. Because, like, you watch something like Spider-Man No Way Home, and it's like, okay, cool, we get to see all, like, these, you know, classic villains from, like, the Amazing Spider-Man movies and the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. And here, we do have some surprise cameos, but they're all collected in one scene, and they're staged in a way where, you know, you have to wait for the music sting, and the film pauses for, you know, your cheers and applause, which very much so, like, for a few Marvel fans who are expecting certain characters or characters that they didn't expect to see in Doctor Strange, that they will be, like, cheering and clapping. And for me, it's just kind of like, okay, this is par for the course. I don't know, maybe it's just because after getting done watching Moon Knight and having that show not have any cameos, like, I'm ready for, like, a Marvel film to stand on its own. Like, we kind of got that with the Eternals, and even like Shang-Chi and partially, like, Black Widow. Those types of films didn't really have as many cameos, and if they did, they were, like, kind of, like, small, kind of like, oh yeah, these people exist in this world. But yeah, for all the expected elements of it, they're okay. They didn't bother me. Like, they're not quite stale. I did get a little bit of a giddy thrill over who pops up in this film, specifically for how they relate to the Doctor Strange story, but they're kind of wearing thin. Thankfully, though, the directing here, the entire style of the film with all, like, the Dutch angles and the zooming in and the crazy dark elements and the multiverse tapping and all this bizarre logic that involves, like, dark magic and dreams, apparently, it's all fun, surreal, bizarre stuff, and it actually takes a lot of risks here. Which you don't see in most Marvel Cinematic Universe movies that usually stick along a specific track. And if you're going to have a film that delves into the multiverse, which you've already gotten, you know, a tiny bit of, like with Spider-Man No Way Home, and a huge chunk of it with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, I think this is a great route. And Sam Raimi definitely made a Sam Raimi Marvel movie that actually has even more horror elements than the Spider-Man movies had. So there's that. I'm glad that at least Sam is getting in a little bit more of his... getting a little bit more horror into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Especially for Doctor Strange. It could really use some stuff like this.